At 11:47 p.m., Celeste Harrington walked into a dark boardroom, picked up a framed photograph of 500 families who were about to lose their homes, and threw it straight through the glass wall of her cousin's office. Then she turned around, looked at the one man in the building she never should have trusted, and said 6 words that changed both their lives forever. "I need you to pretend." What happened next would tear apart a corporation, expose a conspiracy, and force 2 broken people to answer the most dangerous question either of them had ever faced. Is any of this even real anymore? Drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. And if you're new here, subscribe. You don't want to miss what's coming. The building was supposed to be empty. That was the first thing Andre Bennett noticed when the elevator opened on the 42nd floor at 11:40 on a Tuesday night. Every light was on. Not the dim security lighting that usually hummed after hours, all of it. The full overhead panels. The recessed spotlights above the conference room. Even the decorative strips along the ceiling that only came on during board presentations. He had received the text 40 minutes ago. "Need you in the office. Tonight. 42nd floor. Don't mention this to anyone." No greeting, no signature. But he knew the number. He had seen it on work orders, maintenance alerts, and 3 separate late-night crises over the past 2 years. It belonged to Celeste Harrington. And Celeste Harrington did not send informal texts. She sent formatted emails with subject lines and bullet points and follow-up read receipts. Which meant whatever this was, it wasn't business as usual. Andre had left Maya with Loretta, kissed his daughter's forehead while she slept, and driven 20 minutes north, without telling anyone where he was going. He was a senior operations manager. He had learned a long time ago that when your CEO texts you personally at 11 at night and asks you not to say anything, you show up. You ask questions after. He stepped off the elevator and looked down the long hallway toward the corner office. The glass wall of Grant Whitmore's office. The east-facing one, with the panoramic view that Grant never stopped talking about, was shattered. Not cracked, not chipped. Completely gone glass scattered across the tile in a wide arc, some pieces still rocking gently, like they hadn't finished falling. And in the center of that destruction, standing with her back to him, was Celeste. She was still in her work clothes, the charcoal blazer, the dark trousers, the low heels she always wore to long board days. Her hair was pulled back. One of her hands was pressed flat against the frame where the glass used to be. She wasn't moving. "Ms. Harrington?" She turned slowly. Andre had worked at Harrington Urban Development for 6 years. In that time, he had seen Celeste Harrington control a room of 40 hostile investors without raising her voice. He had seen her walk through a collapsed building site 20 minutes after an emergency call and start issuing directives before the dust had settled. He had seen her fire a VP of finance in front of 11 witnesses and not blink once. He had never seen her face look the way it looked right now. Not angry, not cold. Something underneath all of that, something stripped raw. "Close the door," she said. He looked at the shattered glass, then back at her. "Which one?" She almost smiled. "Almost. The one behind you. The one that's still intact." He pulled it shut. The latch clicked. The whole floor felt sealed off from the rest of the world. Celeste walked past him toward the main conference table. She picked up a manila envelope, held it for a moment, then set it back down without opening it. Her fingers were steadier than they should have been for someone who had just put her fist or something else through a glass wall. "How long have you worked here?" 6 years in November. "How long have you been in operations?" "Managed my first team 4 years ago. Senior manager 2 years ago. And you know the South Side communities, the Halstead cluster, the Bronzeville properties. Better than anyone in this building." She nodded once as if confirming something she already knew. "My cousin is going to try to take the company from me," she said. "He has the votes to do it if the shareholder meeting goes the way he's planning. And if he takes control, he's not going to run this company. He's going to strip it. The Halstead cluster, the Bronzeville properties, 312 units of affordable housing on the South Side. He'll sell every one of them to luxury developers inside of 18 months. Andre stood very still. "How many families are we talking about?" 473 tenants currently in residence, another 62 on the waiting list. She turned to look at him directly. People who cannot afford to be displaced. People who have nowhere else to go in this city at these prices. I knew those people. He had grown up 3 blocks from the Halsted cluster. He had walked through those lobbies, spoken with those superintendents, sat in those community meetings where residents asked the same question every year. Is it still safe? Are we still here? What do you need from me? Celeste reached into the envelope. She pulled out a single sheet of paper, a printed photograph taken at a distance slightly blurred at the edges, but unmistakably clear at its center. Andre recognized it immediately. 3 weeks ago, the Bronzeville site. One of the maintenance workers had fallen from a scaffolding rig, broken wrist, fractured collarbone, badly shaken. When the call came in, Andre had been the first manager on site. He had stayed with the man, Leon Carr, until the ambulance came, held his hand while Leon tried not to cry, and called Leon's wife himself to tell her what happened and which hospital. Celeste had arrived 20 minutes later. She had stood beside Andre as he updated her. At some point, he hadn't planned it. Neither had she. She had put her hand briefly on his arm. He had covered it with his. 2 people responding to the same awful moment. Someone had photographed it. This ran in 3 local outlets yesterday, Celeste said. By this morning it was national. The caption on 2 of them described us as, she paused, as a couple. He stared at her. We were at an accident scene. I know that. You know that. The internet has decided otherwise. He set the photograph down slowly. Okay, so put out a correction. I can't. Why not? Celeste sat down at the head of the conference table. She looked at the wall in front of her, not at him. When she finally spoke again, her voice was very even. The kind of even that takes practice. The kind of even that holds something enormous underneath it. Grant's been running the campaign against me for 4 months, not just among the shareholders publicly, op-eds, podcasts, dinner conversations with journalists he's known for 20 years. The story he's been building is that I'm unstable, that I'm disconnected from the communities we serve, that I care more about optics than outcomes. She looked at Andre now. And the hardest part is some of it has landed. Because I'm not good at being perceived. I'm good at the work, the actual work. But Grant understands something I've always refused to learn, that perception is its own kind of reality. And the photograph changes the perception. It complicates his narrative. A relationship with a man like you, a father, a community member, someone who grew up in the neighborhoods we develop, it doesn't fit the portrait he's been painting. She folded her hands on the table. The company's communications team ran the numbers last night. 48 hours after the photo ran, our favorability among key shareholder demographics went up 11 points. 11 points. Andre felt something cold move through him. Ms. Harrington. Celeste. Celeste. He kept his voice level. What exactly are you asking me to do? She looked at him without flinching. I need you to pretend you love me for 6 weeks. The room was completely silent. He heard the ventilation system. He heard very faintly the sound of traffic 42 floors below. He heard his own breathing, which was staying deliberately calm, because he was a man who had learned that the moment you lose your composure is the moment you lose the conversation. No. Andre, no. He stood up. My daughter is 7 years old. Her mother has been gone for 3 years. She has spent those 3 years watching me hold everything together, and I will not drag her into a corporate performance. I won't use her as a prop. I won't use myself as a prop. Maya wouldn't be involved. You already used the word relationship. A relationship involves my life. My life involves Maya. There is no version of this that doesn't touch her. Celeste didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. She simply sat with what he'd said, let it exist in the room without trying to eliminate it. You're right, she said finally. He had expected her to push. He stopped. Maya will not appear in any public capacity without your explicit written permission, she continued. You retain absolute authority over her involvement. If that means 0 involvement, 0 is the arrangement. No photographs, no events, no coordinated appearances involving your daughter. And if I decide I'm done any time during these 6 weeks, you walk. No consequences, no retaliation. You keep your position. I don't want favors. Then you keep the promotion you've already earned, the one I've been sitting on for 2 months because the board pushed back on promoting a manager from operations without an advanced degree. She watched his jaw tighten. That's real, Andre. That happened. The promotion exists independent of this conversation, and you deserve it, independent of this conversation. I'm not buying your dignity. I'm asking for 6 weeks of your time to save 473 families from being pushed out of their homes. He turned away from the table and walked to the window. Chicago spread out below him in every direction, the lights of the South Side stretching east toward the lake, the neighborhoods he'd walked since childhood, the streets where he'd delivered campaign literature for a city council member at 14 years old, because his mother had told him that local politics was the only politics that actually touched your real life. I thought about the Halstead families. He thought about Mrs. Edmonds on the 3rd floor, who had lived in the same unit for 22 years and whose granddaughter had been born in that building. He thought about Leon Carr, who had fractured his collarbone on a Harrington scaffolding rig, and whose job still existed because Celeste Harrington had fought a safety violation claim through 3 arbitration sessions rather than settle. I thought about what Grant Whitmore's office used to look like before Celeste had apparently put her hand through the glass wall. He turned back around. What are the actual boundaries? Something shifted in her posture, just slightly. Public appearances only. Events, dinners, press adjacency, meaning we're seen together in situations where our relationship is implied rather than directly stated wherever possible. No manufactured photographs staged without consent. No scripted affection beyond what's naturally visible in a professional setting. She paused. And I never ask you to lie to your daughter. She's 7, she'll figure it out. Then if she asks you, tell her the truth. And if she tells someone, then she tells someone. That surprised him more than anything else she'd said. That could end the whole arrangement. Yes. Celeste met his eyes steadily. But I won't ask you to teach your child to deceive people. That's not a price I'm willing to put on this. Andre looked at her for a long time. I was trying to find the calculation underneath the statement. Every person at this company operated from a position. Every meeting had an agenda. Every gesture had a return. That was corporate life. He understood it because he'd learned to survive it as one of the few black men who'd reached his level without the right last name, or the right graduate school, or the right set of social connections. But he couldn't find the angle. Either she meant it, or she was a better performer than anyone he'd ever met. He decided with the kind of decision you make when the alternative is worse to find out. I want it in writing, he said. Every boundary, every protection. Not a verbal agreement, a document. My attorney reviews it. Fair. And I want authority over the community housing division, not a title. Actual authority. Budget decisions, vendor selections, tenant relations. I report to you, not to any intermediary, who can override my decisions without accountability. Done. And if at any point I believe this arrangement is being used to harm my daughter, my community, or my personal integrity, I end it. Immediately. No negotiation. Agreed. He exhaled. He hadn't realized he'd been holding his breath. I'm not doing this for you, he said clearly. I know. I'm doing it for the people in those buildings. I know that too. He picked up his jacket from the chair where he'd draped it. When's the first appearance? 3 days. A housing charity gala downtown. Black tie. He nodded once and walked toward the door. Andre. He stopped. Thank you, she said. Not the way executives thanked people clipped final transactional. Something quieter than that. He didn't answer. He walked to the elevator and pressed the button and stood in the hallway with the scent of broken glass still in the air and the absolute certainty that he had just made either the most important decision of his life or the most catastrophic one. The doors opened. He stepped in. He didn't look back. The gala was at the Lyric Building, downtown, a renovated 19th century concert hall that the Harrington Foundation had helped preserve 7 years ago. Andre knew this because Celeste had told him in a briefing document she emailed at 6:30 the morning after their meeting. The document was 7 pages long, included a timeline, a guest list with relationship notes, a list of likely questions from the press, and at the bottom, in a single bullet points, suggested conversation topics if silence becomes uncomfortable: Chicago architecture community, land trusts, Maya's school projects if you're comfortable. No need to discuss personal history beyond what feels natural. He had stared at that bullet point for a while. He called Marcus his oldest friend while Maya was at school. "Man, you gotta run this by me again." "I already ran it by you." "Run it again. Because I need to make sure I heard what I heard." "She needs someone to appear to be her boyfriend for 6 weeks. In exchange, I get the promotion and actual authority over the housing division. And it protects the South Side communities from her cousin." A long silence. "Andre." "Marcus." "Brother, I say this with love. I say this because I have known you since we were 11 years old, and I watched you catch a baseball with your face and not cry. Are you out of your mind? The alternative is 473 families lose their homes. The alternative is you don't voluntarily complicate your life by fake dating your billionaire boss while raising a 7-year-old by yourself. She's not a billionaire. She owns buildings, Andre. Multiple buildings. In Chicago. She is at minimum a very significant millionaire, and you are splitting hairs. Will you watch Maya on Thursday night? Yes, because I love Maya, and also because I want a full report. He hung up. He looked at the 7-page briefing document again. He thought about the single line at the bottom. Maya's school projects if you're comfortable. Something about those 5 words. The care in them. The small recognition that there were things that weren't hers to ask for made him less certain that this was purely calculation. Or maybe that was exactly what a great calculation looked like. He put the document down and went to iron his suit. They met in the lobby at 7. He arrived first. Celeste arrived exactly 2 minutes later, not late, not significantly early, simply precisely on time, the way she seemed to do everything. She was in a deep navy dress, structured at the shoulders, simple in a way that cost money to achieve. Her hair was down. He hadn't seen her hair down before. He straightened his jacket. She looked at him, and for a brief moment, just a fragment of a second, her composure slipped. She caught it immediately. "You look appropriately dressed," she said. "That's a ringing endorsement." "I mean, you look good. I'm not good at compliments." The briefing document mentioned that. She looked at him sharply. "I wrote that about professional conversations." "I know. I'm extending the principle." They walked in together. The room was full. 300 people, a string quartet, candles on every table, the kind of charity gala where the tickets cost $2,000 and the actual charitable impact was a topic of active debate. Celeste moved through it with the precision of a chess player greeting, acknowledging, deflecting, steering. He watched her work. She was extraordinary at it, controlled and warm enough to seem human without giving anything away. But he could see it now, having watched her in the office, having sat across from her in a room without an audience. Every exchange was a small performance. She moved through this room the way an actor executes a long-rehearsed scene. Every word was chosen. Every smile was deployed. She was very, very good at it. And it looked exhausting. At one point, she touched his arm, a gentle, brief contact that looked natural. He glanced at her. She was looking across the room at Grant Whitmore, who was standing near the bar with 2 shareholders, smiling the specific smile of someone who believes they've already won. Grant was 2 inches taller than Celeste, 20 years older, and possessed the kind of easy inherited confidence that Andre had spent his entire career learning to recognize and never trust. He caught Andre's eye across the room and held it for exactly 1 second too long. Not hostile. Measuring. Andre held it back. He didn't look away first. Then Grant smiled, different smile, this one directed specifically at Andre, and turned back to his conversation. A reporter from the Tribune got to them before dinner. She was polite, experienced, direct in the way that good reporters are when they don't want to give you time to construct an answer. "Ms. Harrington, you two have clearly been the topic of conversation since the photograph. Can you tell us, what do you love about him?" Celeste went still for less than a full second. Andre felt it. The tiny hesitation before the prepared answer would have come out. The sentence she had drafted probably at 6 in the morning with all its careful word choices. And something in him moved before he could think about whether it was wise. He said simply and quietly, she was reviewing tenant hardship appeals at 2 in the morning last October. Not delegating it, personally reviewing. I know because I was working late and I walked past her office and the light was on. She had a cup of cold coffee and a stack of files, and she was writing notes in the margins by hand. There were 47 appeals. She remembered all of them at the follow-up meeting 3 weeks later. Every name. The reporter looked at him. Celeste had gone very still. She keeps a list, he continued, of every maintenance worker and every superintendent in every building the company manages. By name. Not in a file, she knows them. She calls them directly when there's an emergency, rather than routing it through layers of management that slow everything down. He paused. And when one of our workers got hurt on a job site 3 weeks ago, she didn't send a representative. She showed up. That's what I would tell you. He looked at Celeste. She was looking at him with an expression he had never seen on her face before. Not gratitude, something more complicated than gratitude. Something that looked for one unguarded moment, like being truly seen for the first time. The reporter wrote for a moment, then looked up. Ms. Harrington, anything to add? Celeste recovered smoothly. No, she said. He covered it. The car was quiet on the way back. They were in the rear of the company car Chicago, moving past the windows in both directions. The city looked different from the inside of a hired car cleaner, more distant, like a photograph of itself. Celeste spoke first. You didn't use any of the suggested talking points. They were too polished. The point of talking points is to be polished. The point of talking points, he said, is to say something that sounds true. Those didn't. So I said something that was true. Silence. How did you know about the appeals? Because I was in the building. I pay attention to what happens in buildings I work in. Another silence. Longer this time. That list of employee names, she said quietly. You knew about that too. I've seen you do it. Every site visit, every walkthrough, you ask someone's name, and then you use it again. People notice that. They don't say anything because you're the CEO, and they're not sure what to make of it. But they notice. He felt her turn slightly to look at him. He kept his eyes on the window. Why are you telling me this? Because you asked the wrong question in there. What question did I ask? You asked yourself what you were supposed to say. You should have asked what was actually true. He turned to look at her now. The true version is better. The true version is also apparently the one that wins elections and shareholder votes. You're not bad at being perceived, Celeste. You're just afraid of the version of yourself that's actually worth perceiving. The car stopped at a red light. She didn't say anything for the rest of the ride. But when they pulled up in front of her building and the driver opened the door, she paused before stepping out. Not long, just a breath. Good night, Andre. Good night, Ms. Harrington. She almost smiled again. This time she let it reach the corner of her mouth. Loretta Bennett was still awake when he got home. She was 71. Danielle's mother looked like someone who had survived a lot more than they'd ever volunteered to discuss. She was sitting at his kitchen table with a cup of tea and a crossword puzzle she'd probably already finished 2 hours ago and was pretending to work on, so she had an excuse to still be there. Maya. Asleep since 9:30, she made me read her the dinosaur book twice. He took off his jacket. He put it over the back of the chair. He sat down across from Loretta. She looked at him for a long time without speaking. That was the thing about Loretta, she never rushed a silence. How was the work thing? She said finally. Fine. You're wearing your good suit on a Thursday for a work thing. It was a gala. She looked at her crossword. 7 letters. Performance meant to conceal something true, starting with F. He looked at her. Loretta. What? That's not a real crossword clue. She smiled into her tea. No, but it fit. She set the cup down. What are you doing, Andre? He thought about what to tell her. He thought about 473 families, and the Halstead cluster, and Mrs. Edmonds on the third floor, and everything Grant Whitmore was planning to take apart. "I'm trying to protect the community," he said. "You can do that without wearing your suit and going to galas at 11 at night. Not this time." Loretta looked at him very carefully. She had loved Danielle for 32 years. She had held Andre up through the worst period of his life. She had shown up at his house 2 weeks after the funeral and stayed for 3 months without being asked, because she understood in the way that people who've carried grief understand that the first months are when you need someone to make sure you're eating. She didn't hate that he was moving forward. She'd never said that, never implied it. But she saw things, and she said them, and you couldn't choose when. "This woman," she said. "It's not Loretta, it's not like that." "Did I say what it was like?" He exhaled. "She needs help. The company needs help. And people who need real help, our people, the South Side residents, are going to get hurt if this falls apart." That's it. That's all it is." Loretta picked up her cup. She took a slow sip. She set it down. 7 letters, she said. What a man tells himself when the real reason scares him. He stood up. "I'll walk you to your car. I can walk myself to my car. I'm 71, not 91. She gathered her things unhurried. At the door she stopped and looked back at him. "Be careful with your daughter's heart. Don't be careful with yours. The two of you deserve the same consideration." She kissed him on the cheek. "Good night, baby." She was gone before he could answer. He stood in the kitchen for a while. The house was quiet in the way it always was at night, a specific kind of quiet that he had learned over 3 years to live inside of rather than run from. Maya's drawings on the refrigerator. A half-finished glass of juice she'd left on the counter. The photograph on the windowsill. Danielle at the beach laughing at something outside the frame. He stood there looking at it for a long time. Then he said quietly to nobody, "I'm just doing what's right." The photograph didn't answer. The quiet stayed exactly what it was. He turned off the light and went to check on his daughter. Maya was sleeping with one arm thrown over the edge of the bed, and her mouth slightly open, the way she'd slept since she was a baby. He stood in the doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe. He thought about what Celeste had said. "I won't ask you to teach your child to deceive people." I thought about the reporter's question. He thought about the moment when Celeste had frozen, when the prepared answer had failed, and the real person underneath had surfaced for just half a second, and the way she had looked at him when he said the true things instead. I was not a man who confused proximity for intimacy. He had spent his entire marriage understanding the difference between the surface of a person and their actual center. Danielle had taught him that not by instruction, but by example. She had been exactly the same person in public as she was at 2 in the morning in their kitchen, eating cereal and arguing about whether any movie made after 1997 was worth the time. He did not know who Celeste Harrington was at 2 in the morning. He did not know if the woman in that office, the one who had apparently put her fist through a glass wall and then sat across from him with completely steady hands, was the real one, or simply the most effective performance. He pushed Maya's arm back up onto the bed. She didn't wake up. "Love you, baby girl," he whispered. She made a small sound that meant nothing and everything. He went to bed. He didn't sleep for a long time. The agreement arrived in writing 4 days later. His attorney Calvin Moore read every page and called him after. She held to every point, all the protections. Maya's involvement clause is actually stronger in the document than what you described verbally. She had her counsel add additional language limiting any mention of your daughter in any company communication without a separate written consent form each time. A pause. "This is unusual, Andre." "I know. A woman who voluntarily strengthens protections for the opposing party's child. Either she's genuine or she has the single best legal team in Illinois." "She might be both." "Yeah." Calvin paused again. "Sign it if you want. It's clean. But be smart about what you're actually signing." "What do you mean?" "I mean legally you're signing a professional arrangement, but you're also—" Another pause. "This is a different kind of agreement than the document. Just know that." He signed it. He brought the papers back to the office himself in person at 8 in the morning. Celeste was already at her desk when he knocked on her open door. She was in a different suit, dark green this time with reading glasses on and a coffee cup that still had steam rising from it. She looked up. He set the signed document on her desk. She picked it up, looked at the last page, looked at his signature. Then she opened her desk drawer and signed her own copy and slid it across to him. "We start in earnest next week," she said. "There's a community meeting in Bronzeville on Wednesday. I'll need you there. It's the kind of event that will carry weight with 3 of the swing vote shareholders." "I know about that meeting. I was going anyway." She tilted her head slightly. "You go to the community board meetings. I've been going for 2 years. They're open. They matter." He picked up his copy of the agreement. "If you want to look like you belong in a room full of Southside residents, Celeste, you need to actually listen to what they're saying. Not manage them. Not perform empathy. Listen." She studied him. "Are you going to spend these 6 weeks educating me?" "No, I'm going to do my job. But if you're standing next to me while I do it, you might learn something." He walked toward the door. "Andre." He stopped. "Wednesday," she said. 7 p.m. "I'll be there at 6:30. He left. Back at his desk, he opened his email. There was already a message from her sent 4 minutes ago while he was still walking down the hallway. 6:30, noted. I'll be there at 6:15. He stared at the screen. Then, for the first time since this whole thing had started, he laughed. Not a polite laugh, a real one. He pressed his hand over his mouth and looked at his computer and thought with the very specific clarity of a man who has made his decision and is only beginning to understand its full weight. "I am in so much trouble." The community meeting in Bronzeville started at 7 and ran until 9:45 because Mrs. Patricia Edmonds, who had lived in Unit 3C of the Halsted building for 22 years, had a lot to say about the hot water situation, and she was not going to be rushed. Celeste arrived at 6:14. Andre was already there, standing near the back of the room talking to a man named Darnell, who managed the boiler system for 2 of the South Side properties. They were deep in a conversation about pressure valves. Andre had his jacket off and his sleeves rolled up and was drawing something on the back of a flyer with a pen Darnell had loaned him. Celeste stopped in the doorway. She had prepared for this meeting the way she prepared for board presentations. She had read the community meeting minutes from the past 18 months. She had reviewed the maintenance request logs. She had 3 points she wanted to make and 4 questions she intended to ask. She had not prepared for the version of Andre Bennett, who showed up to a community meeting with his sleeves rolled up, drawing boiler diagrams on event flyers with borrowed pens 2 minutes after he told her he'd be there at 6:30. She walked in. He glanced up. He said nothing about the fact that she'd beaten her own stated time. "Darnell, this is Ms. Harrington. She runs the company." Darnell looked at her with the specific expression of a man who has filed 12 maintenance requests in the past calendar year and received responses on 4 of them. "I know who she is." "Good," Celeste said. "Tell me about the pressure valve issue, from the beginning." Darnell blinked. Andre said nothing. But she caught the slight shift in his posture, not surprise exactly. Something closer to recalibration. Darnell told her about the pressure valve. From the beginning. It took 11 minutes and involved a detailed history of a recurring problem that had been flagged in 2021, partially addressed in 2022, reflagged in 2023, and assigned to a contractor in early 2024 who had apparently done something to the secondary line that made the original problem worse without technically closing the work order. Celeste listened without interrupting. She asked 2 questions, both specific. She wrote down the contractor's name. When Darnell finished, he looked at her differently than when she'd walked in. Not warmly, not yet, but differently. "I'll have someone from operations on site by Friday," she said. "Not a contractor, a direct employee. Someone accountable to us." "I'll go myself," Andre said. Darnell nodded once and went to find his seat as the meeting was being called to order. Celeste moved to stand beside Andre. She kept her voice low. "You were supposed to let me handle the community interactions. You were handling it fine. I just offered to go Friday. That wasn't in the schedule." Boiler problems don't care about schedules. She pressed her lips together. He wasn't wrong. The problem was that he said it the way people say things when they know they're right, and they're not interested in the argument that comes after. They sat near the back. The meeting unfolded the way community meetings do, earnestly, loudly, with several competing priorities, and at least one moment where two people talked over each other for 90 seconds, until a third person banged on the table. Celeste watched Andre work the room without appearing to work it. He knew when to lean forward and when to sit back. He knew which residents wanted to be heard and which ones wanted to be solved. He knew Mrs. Edmonds' name without being introduced. Knew that the man in the corner, tall, quiet, gray-haired, was the building's most reliable informal mediator, and that if he nodded, it meant the room was moving toward consensus. I knew all of this, the way you know things you've spent years learning because they actually mattered to you. Halfway through the meeting, a younger woman, maybe 25, with a sleeping infant strapped to her chest, raised her hand to ask about the waiting list. She'd been on it for 11 months. She was paying $1,100 a month for a studio in Pilsen that had mice and a landlord who answered texts in his own time. She wanted to know if there was a real timeline, or if the waiting list was the polite version of never. The room got quiet. Not uncomfortable quiet. The kind of quiet that means everyone knows this question and has been waiting for someone else to ask it. Celeste started to stand. Andre put his hand briefly on her arm. Not stopping her, just a half second of contact that said, "Wait, read the room." She read the room. Then she stood up anyway because the question deserved an answer from someone with actual authority. "Your name?" "Jasmine. Jasmine Carter." "Ms. Carter, I'm Celeste Harrington. I run Harrington Urban Development." She didn't add a qualifier, didn't soften it. The honest answer is that the waiting list moves slowly because we have more need than we have supply. That's a failure of policy at multiple levels, and I won't pretend otherwise. She paused. "What I can tell you is your specific unit number on the list and an honest projected timeline. I'll have that to you in writing by end of week. And if anything has been mishandled in your processing, I want to know." Jasmine Carter looked at her for a long moment. "You're going to remember me after you leave this room. Write your number on this." Celeste held out her card. "I'll call you Thursday." Jasmine took the card slowly, like she wasn't quite sure it was real. When Celeste sat back down, Andre was looking straight ahead. "Don't say anything," she said quietly. "I wasn't going to say anything." "You were thinking something loud." "I was thinking," he said just as quietly, "that you're better at this than you give yourself credit for." She didn't answer. The meeting continued, but she felt it, that sentence, in the specific place where things land when they're true, and you weren't braced for them. Thursday, she called Jasmine Carter. She had the processing information pulled. There had been a paperwork error, a clerical misclassification in the income verification stage that had knocked Jasmine's application back 4 months without notification. 4 months on a waiting list with an infant and an $1,100 studio with mice because someone had checked the wrong box. She fixed it. She had it fixed by noon. She did not announce this to anyone. She did not mention it to the press coordinator or the communications team or anyone who might convert it into a shareholder-friendly human interest note. She called Jasmine Carter, directly explained what had happened, apologized for the error, and told her the corrected timeline. Jasmine said thank you, and then was quiet for a moment, and then said, "I didn't expect you to actually call." Celeste thought about what to say. She said, "I told you I would." She hung up and went back to her afternoon. She had 4 more calls and a budget review. The morning had run long. Her assistant had already rescheduled 2 items. She didn't think about it again until that evening when her phone buzzed with a text from an unfamiliar number. "Darnell said you got the Friday engineer scheduled, and I heard about Jasmine Carter. You didn't have to do either of those things quietly. You chose to. I think you should know that matters more than the gala did." She sat with that text for a long time. She typed back, "Are you keeping track of what I do?" His answer came in under a minute. "I pay attention to what happens in buildings I work in. You taught me that." She almost smiled. She set the phone down. She picked it up again. She typed, "She said she didn't expect me to call." Most people in her position have been let down enough times that surprise is the default. That bothers me. Good, he wrote back. It should. She put the phone on the charger and went to make herself something to eat, which in her apartment meant standing in front of a refrigerator that contained mineral water, 2 kinds of mustard left over, Thai food from Tuesday, and the persistent optimism of a woman who kept buying groceries she didn't have time to cook. She stood there in the light of the open refrigerator for a while, in the quiet of her glass-walled penthouse, with the city spread out in every direction, and tried to remember the last time she'd eaten a meal she hadn't ordered, prepared, or consumed alone. She couldn't. She closed the refrigerator and ordered Thai food again. The first time she came to Andre's house was not planned. It was a Saturday. They had agreed to meet at a coffee shop downtown to go over their story, the timeline of how they'd met properly, how things had developed, the kind of biographical scaffolding a relationship needs when people ask questions at dinner parties. It was practical. It was necessary. It was the kind of meeting that would make the performance sustainable. Andre texted at 9:15. Maya has a fever, can't make downtown. Can you come here? I can put her down for a nap. Celeste stood in her kitchen in her weekend clothes, pressed trousers, clean blouse, the version of casual that still looked like she'd planned it, and looked at that text. She could reschedule. That was reasonable. That was the professional response. She typed back, address. He sent it. She took a car. Andre's house was a 2-story brick bungalow on a tree-lined street on the south side. The front porch had 2 chairs on it and a rubber boot that had been left outside, probably by a 7-year-old who had decided against wearing it at some point and simply abandoned it. The yard was small and mostly grass, with a patch near the fence where someone had planted something recently. The soil was still fresh and dark. She rang the bell. He opened the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants and looked for the first time in her knowledge of him genuinely tired. Not professionally tired, the kind of tired that starts before you get out of bed. Sorry. She woke up at 3 with 101, and it's been a long morning. How is she now? 125. Better. She's watching a movie. He stepped back to let her in. The house hit her all at once, not overwhelming, but full. Full in the way that a house is full when it's actually lived in. There were drawings on the refrigerator and a backpack by the stairs and a laundry basket at the bottom of the steps that had been carried that far and then apparently decided it had gone far enough. The kitchen smelled like toast and chamomile tea and something underneath it that she couldn't name, but that felt like the residue of consistent mornings. She had never been in a home that felt like this. Her childhood home had been a 6,000-square-foot Georgian in Lincoln Park, where every room was designed to communicate the family's wealth to anyone who happened to see it. Her apartment was a study in controlled emptiness. Even her college roommate's apartment had been decorated with intent. This was different. This was a place where life happened and left evidence. A small voice came from the living room. Daddy, who's at the door? A friend from work. A pause. Then the unmistakable sound of a child who is sick, but not sick enough to stay put, getting off a couch. Maya appeared in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. She was in dinosaur pajamas, carrying a stuffed elephant with her hair loose and her eyes slightly glazed, the way sick children's eyes go, still bright but banked. She looked at Celeste with the unself-conscious directness that 7-year-olds have before the world teaches them that staring is rude. You're the lady from the news. Celeste blinked. Yes, probably. My friend Keela's mom showed her the picture. Keela told me you were Daddy's girlfriend. Maya considered this seriously. Are you? Andre said from somewhere behind Celeste. Maya. It's a real question, Maya said with the absolute authority of a child who has decided that the adult world makes very little sense and has given up pretending otherwise. You either are or you aren't. Celeste crouched down so she was at Maya's level. She did not know what she was going to say. She had not prepared for this. There was no briefing document for a 7-year-old in dinosaur pajamas with a fever and an elephant. Your dad and I work together, she said, and we're spending time together to figure out if we're friends. That's true. Maya thought about this. My teacher says that's how most good things start, with figuring out. Your teacher sounds smart. She's okay. She gives too much homework. Maya looked at the elephant in her arms, then back at Celeste. Do you know how to play Uno? Maya, Andre said. Ms. Harrington is here to work, not... I know how to play Uno, Celeste said. She wasn't sure why she said it. She did technically know the rules of Uno. She had played it exactly once at a company family picnic 4 years ago and had found it structurally absurd. But Maya's face shifted at the words, not excited exactly, more like reassessed. We can play after your nap, Celeste told her. You need to rest first. I'm not tired. You have a fever. That doesn't make me tired. It makes you think you're not tired. That's actually worse. Maya stared at her. Something in the stare changed, not softening, but recalibrating in the way that children recalibrate when an adult has said something true instead of convenient. Fine, she said. But after nap, we play Uno. Deal. Andre steered Maya back toward the couch and settled her back down with her elephant and what appeared to be a documentary about deep-sea creatures, which was, he explained in a low voice coming back to the kitchen, Maya's preferred sick day viewing because it was, in her words, the same kind of sad as being sick, but interesting. Celeste stood at the kitchen table. She's remarkable, she said. She's 7. That's not a contradiction. He looked at her for a moment, then pulled out a chair and gestured for her to sit. He poured her coffee without asking how she took it, which she noticed, and put it in front of her with a small container of cream. He had noticed. 3 weeks in, and he had simply noticed. The story, he said, pulling out the notes he'd made. How we met. How things developed. Right. She wrapped her hands around the mug. How do you want to tell it? The truth is usually the best scaffold for a lie. We met at work. We've worked together for 2 years. There was the moment at the accident site. The rest is, he gestured vaguely, implied. It needs more than implied. At the investor dinner next week, someone will ask. Then we say it was slow, that we didn't act on it right away, that it took time. He looked at her steadily. All of those things are true, by the way. It did take time. We didn't act on anything right away. We're still not acting on anything. I know. A beat of silence. Andre. Story. Let's stay on the story. She put the coffee down. She looked at her notes. They worked for 2 hours. It was oddly easy, filling in the outline with real moments, real conversations, real observations they'd actually made about each other. The story that emerged wasn't constructed so much as excavated 2 people who had been in the same building for 2 years, watching each other, understanding more than they'd said, until a specific moment at a specific job site made the private visible. All of it had the advantage of being essentially true. At one point, Maya appeared from the living room, declared that she wasn't tired and that she hadn't been asleep, which was contradicted by the crease on her cheek and the slightly dazed expression that followed waking up. She ate half a piece of toast. She looked at Celeste again with that same evaluative directness. You're still here. We had a lot of work. Does your work always take this long? Usually longer. Maya considered this. Daddy makes good grilled cheese. You should stay for lunch. Maya. I'm just saying she could. The sandwich doesn't cost extra. Celeste looked at Andre. He was pressing his hand over his mouth, which was the thing he did when he was trying not to smile. I'd like that, Celeste said, if it's not too much trouble. It's a sandwich, Maya said with the magnificent practicality of a child who has no patience for adult social performance. It's not trouble, it's lunch. Andre made the grilled cheese. He burned the first one not badly, but enough, and Maya announced this with great ceremony, and he said, I know, and made another one, and the second one was fine. They ate at the kitchen table. Celeste, who ate most of her meals at her desk, or in cars, or at restaurants where the food arrived on plates chosen by someone who'd thought carefully about aesthetic impact, ate a slightly imperfect grilled cheese sandwich at a kitchen table covered with Maya's drawings and someone's forgotten homework assignment. It was the best meal she'd eaten in months, and she could not have explained why, except that it had nothing to do with the food. Maya talked through most of lunch. She talked about the deep-sea documentary and a fish called an anglerfish that she found both horrifying and fascinating. She talked about her friend Keela and a complicated social situation that had arisen over a jump rope that apparently didn't belong to anyone specifically, but that Keela had claimed proprietary rights over, and that Maya found legally dubious. She talked about a book report she was writing on a library book about a girl who builds robots. She did not talk about her mother. But at one point, while Andre was washing the plates, Maya looked at Celeste and said without preamble and without particular heaviness, "Daddy doesn't usually bring people home." Celeste set down her glass. "I know. He brought his friend Marcus once, and Grandma Loretta is here a lot. But not—" Maya stopped. "Not like this. What do you think about that?" Maya looked at the table. She traced a line on one of her drawings with one finger. "I think he's been lonely for a while," she said, with the devastating accuracy of a child who watches the adults in her life more carefully than those adults realize. "And I think he doesn't tell anyone, because he doesn't want people to feel sorry." Celeste sat very still. "He loves you a lot," she said. "I know." Maya looked up. "That's different though, isn't it?" It wasn't a question. Andre came back from the sink. He looked at them both. Something in the quality of the silence told him something had passed between them that he hadn't caught, and he had the wisdom not to ask what. "Movie," he said to Maya. "Can Celeste watch too?" He looked at Celeste. She thought about her afternoon. She had emails. She had a call at 4 she could probably move. She had a penthouse full of controlled quiet and mineral water and leftovers. "Sure," she said. They watched 40 minutes of the deep-sea documentary. Maya fell back asleep halfway through between them on the couch, her elephant tucked under her arm. The anglerfish circled silently on the screen. Celeste did not move. She was aware of how carefully she was not moving. On the other side of Maya, Andre was also very still. After a minute, very quietly, he said, "Thank you for coming. You didn't have to." "I know. She likes you." "I like her." He looked at Maya's sleeping face. "She doesn't do that with everyone. The talking, the Uno offer. She's usually—" He stopped. "She's careful with people, like me." "Then I'm glad she wasn't careful." He looked at Celeste across the width of his sleeping daughter. Something moved between them that was not performed and not strategic, and not part of any briefing document or agreed arrangement. Just two people sitting in a quiet room with a child asleep between them and the low sound of ocean footage on the television, recognizing something in each other that they had not named yet and were not ready to. He looked away first, back at the screen. She looked away after. The investor dinner was at a private room at a restaurant in River North. 12 people, heavy crystal, the kind of meal where everything on the menu is described in 3 words and costs an amount that would cover a month of Mrs. Edmonds' rent. Grant was there. He arrived late and sat across from Andre with the deliberate placement of someone who has chosen their position carefully. It started with small talk. It always started with small talk. The kind that takes place at these dinners, between people who are all quietly calculating each other's positions. Then Grant leaned back in his chair and looked at Andre directly. "So tell me," he said in the tone of a man who believes he's being charming. "How did a operations manager from Southside end up at this table?" "The usual way," Andre said. "He worked for it." A small laugh from 2 people at the table. Grant smiled. "Of course, I just mean it's quite a leap. From managing building crews to—" He gestured at the room. "This." "I'm not sure it's a leap," Andre said calmly. "The building crews are what makes this possible. Without operations, there's no asset. Without the asset, there's no dinner." He picked up his water glass. "Though I do appreciate the upgrade." More laughter. Warmer this time. Grant's smile stayed fixed. He turned to Celeste. "I've been meaning to ask you something, Celeste, professionally." He said it the way people say professionally when they mean the opposite. The community engagement strategy, whose idea was it really? The photograph, the gala, the meetings. Did you develop that independently, or did you have input? Celeste set her fork down. "Every strategic decision I make is mine," she said. "That's been true since I took the chair. I'm sure you know that." "Of course," I'm just curious about the inspiration. Grant's gaze moved to Andre. You've been quite visible lately, Andre. It's an interesting position, being the face of something. I'm not the face of anything, Andre said. I'm a senior operations manager doing his job. Come on, you're more than that now. You're the story. Grant leaned forward slightly. Single father South Side background works his way up. It's a compelling narrative. Very useful for someone trying to reshape public perception. I'm just wondering if you're aware of how you're being used. The table got quiet. Andre set his own fork down. He looked at Grant for a long moment with the specific calm of a man who has heard this kind of thing before, in different rooms, with different words, and has learned that the response that lands hardest is the one that doesn't perform anger. I've spent my career being underestimated by people who confuse wealth with worth, he said. You're not the first person to suggest that my presence in a room requires an explanation beyond my qualifications. I'm used to it. He picked up his fork again. The good news is, what I think of your implication doesn't require your approval. One of the investors at the far end of the table actually laughed, a real one, short and sharp. Grant's smile thinned. He looked at Celeste. He's good, he said. I'll give you that. I didn't ask for your assessment of him. I'm giving it as a professional observation. He leaned back. You've always been effective, Celeste, but you've never been relatable. People have said so for years. Cold, they say. Disconnected. And now suddenly you're at community meetings and charity galas, and you have this, another gesture. This relationship, it's convenient. Most true things are inconvenient, Celeste said. Are they? Or is this a very sophisticated brand? Refresh? Grant. Her voice was completely. We both know what this dinner is about. You want to see if I'll flinch. I won't. She picked up her wine glass. But since we're being direct, I'd like to know how your renovation contractors are performing on the Bronzeville secondary renovation. The one that's been running 14 months on a 9-month timeline, with a budget variance you haven't explained to the board. Silence. Grant's expression didn't change, but something behind it did. That's an internal matter. Yes, it is. I look forward to making it an internal board matter at the next meeting. She smiled at him with the specific warmth of a woman who has just drawn a line. More wine. Later in the car, Celeste stared out the window. Andre watched her profile against the passing lights. You knew about the budget variance before tonight, he said. I've known for 3 weeks. Why didn't you bring it to the board already? Because I need more than a variance. A variance can be explained. I need documentation. A pattern. She paused. I need proof that it isn't mismanagement. That it's deliberate. He was quiet for a moment. He was trying to get in my head, he said. I know, I'm sorry. Don't apologize. He didn't get in. But I need you to know. He turned to look at her. The things he was implying, that I'm a prop, that my presence here is a performance, I've heard that before. Not from people like Grant, from people who should have known better. He let that sit. I'm not doing this because you needed a symbol. I'm doing it because it matters. And I need that to be clear. It is clear. Even to you. She looked at him directly. Especially to me. He nodded once. He looked back at the window. The things you said about me, she said quietly. To the reporter at the gala. And at the dinner, what you said about Danielle's appeals, the contractor. I said what was true. Those things weren't in any script. No. Why did you say them? He was quiet for a long moment. Because you were about to give a rehearsed answer to a real question. He looked at her. And you're not a rehearsed answer. Whatever else you are, and I haven't figured all of it out, you're not that. She looked at him. The car moved through the city. The lights shifted and changed. Andre, she said slowly, like she was working toward something she hadn't planned to say. Don't, he said. Not unkindly, just steady. She stopped. He looked out the window. Not yet, he said. Whatever that was, it's real. I'm not saying it isn't, but I need it to not be yet. She understood what he meant. She understood it in the part of herself that had also been carefully not naming things for 3 weeks. "Okay," she said. "Okay." The car went on through the dark. Neither of them said anything else. But when the driver took a sharp turn and she moved slightly toward him, and he put one hand briefly against the seat back to steady her without being asked, and then left it there, just barely, just near enough that she could feel the warmth of it in the space between them, neither of them moved away. The hand near the seat back stayed in his memory longer than it should have. That was the thing about small gestures. They were harder to dismiss than large ones. A large gesture could be explained away. You could point at the performance, the arrangement, the document with both their signatures at the bottom, and say, that's what that was. But a hand near a seat back in the dark, in a moment when no camera was watching and no shareholder was counting, didn't fit inside any contract language he'd read. He didn't bring it up. She didn't bring it up. They had 4 more joint appearances in the 2 weeks following the investor dinner, and they moved through all of them with the practiced ease of 2 people who had learned each other's rhythms without discussing the fact that they were learning them. He knew when she needed an exit from a conversation. She knew when someone had said something that landed wrong for him, and she could feel the controlled stillness that meant he was choosing not to react. They filled each other's silences in rooms full of people who were watching, and when the rooms emptied, they went back to their separate lives. Except for the texts that ran later and later into the evenings. Except for the Saturday morning when she called because she had a question about a maintenance dispute and stayed on the phone for 40 minutes talking about something entirely different. Except for the fact that when Marcus asked Andre 3 weeks in, "How's the arrangement going?" Andre had answered fine, in a way that made Marcus put his beer down and look at him. Say fine again, but mean it this time. Marcus, say it. It's complicated. See, that's what I thought. Marcus picked his beer back up. What does complicated mean in this context? Scale of 1 to 10, 1 being, you're developing feelings, and in being, you're already in trouble. Andre looked at the wall. Don't answer that, Marcus said. I can see the answer. Nothing has happened. Brother, I have known you since we were 11 years old. Something has happened. It just hasn't happened in a way either of you are willing to say out loud yet. He shook his head. How's Maya taking all of this? She asked me last week if Celeste was going to be at her school science fair. What did you say? I said it wasn't that kind of situation. What did Maya say? Andre was quiet for a moment. She said, it seems like it might be becoming that kind of situation, Daddy. Then she went back to her volcano model. Marcus stared at him. Your 7-year-old is more emotionally perceptive than you. My 7-year-old has always been more emotionally perceptive than me. Danielle was the same way. The name dropped into the conversation the way it always did, not heavily, not with the weight of something forbidden, but with the specific gravity of someone real and present, even in absence. Marcus didn't change the subject. They had known each other long enough that Danielle's name could exist in a conversation without requiring anyone to manage it. You think she'd think this was crazy? Marcus asked. Andre thought about it honestly. I think she'd say I was taking too long to figure out what I actually feel and calling it principle. Marcus pointed at him. That's the most Danielle answer possible. I know. So what are you going to do? Andre looked at his hands. I'm going to finish what I agreed to do. Protect the housing project. Get through the shareholder vote. And figure out the rest after. And if the rest doesn't wait. He didn't answer that. Because he didn't have one. The weekend fundraiser was a 2-day event at a hotel conference center in the suburbs, a housing advocacy summit that drew community organizers, city officials, nonprofit directors, and a carefully curated selection of corporate partners whose presence validated everyone else's. Celeste had a suite. Andre had a room on a lower floor, which was the arrangement they'd agreed to, and which became immediately wordlessly complicated the moment they arrived and had to check in together at the same desk, while the event coordinator smiled at them with the specific warmth of someone who had definitely seen the photograph and had opinions. They got through check-in. In the elevator, Celeste looked at the floor numbers. You're on 12. I'm on 17. I know. The opening reception is at 7. I know. Andre. Celeste. She turned to look at him. This is fine, she said. And she meant the logistics. She meant the weekend. She meant all of it. But the way she said it sounded like someone who was working to convince herself of something she'd already stopped quite believing. It's fine, he agreed. The elevator opened on 12. He stepped out. The doors closed behind him. He stood in the hallway with his bag and thought, it is not fine. Not in the way he'd meant when he'd said it. Not in the way either of them had meant anything for the past 3 weeks. The whole scaffolding of fine had been quietly replaced piece by piece by something that had no agreed-upon name. He went to his room. He unpacked. He called Maya. Daddy, are you at a hotel? I am. Does it have a pool? I think so. You should use the pool. I have events all day. After the events. Maya, it's an overnight work trip. Daddy. Her voice had the patient tone she'd developed recently, the one that meant she was about to say something sensible to someone who was being unnecessarily complicated. You work too hard. Use the pool. Also, is Celeste there? This is a work event. That's not a no. He closed his eyes. Goodbye, Maya. Love you. Use the pool. He hung up. He looked at the ceiling. He did not use the pool. The opening reception was the easy part, crowded loud enough that conversation required leaning close, full of the specific energy of people who care about the same things and rarely get to be in a room together. Celeste moved through it differently than she moved through corporate events. Still precise, still deliberate, but something in her posture was less armored. These were people doing real work, and she knew it, and they could tell she knew it, and that recognition did something to the performance she usually maintained. Andre watched her talk to a woman named Naomi Brooks, a community organizer from Englewood he'd worked with twice on tenant advocacy issues, and he saw the exact moment the conversation shifted from professional courtesy to actual engagement. Naomi was direct in the way that people who've been fighting uphill battles for a long time are direct. She didn't flatter, and she didn't soften. She told Celeste what the companies like hers got wrong specifically, and without diplomatic cushioning, and Celeste listened. Not the performed listening that executives deployed at these events, the steady eye contact and the measured nodding that meant, I'm hearing you, and will now reframe your concern in a way that protects my position. She actually listened. Her coffee went cold while she listened. Later, walking back from the reception toward the elevators, Celeste was quiet in a particular way, not the controlled quiet, but the processing kind. Naomi told you something that's sitting with you, Andre said. She told me that the word affordable in affordable housing has become a marketing term without accountability. That the income thresholds we use to qualify tenants were calculated in 2009 and haven't been meaningfully updated. That there are families in our buildings paying what the company calls affordable rent, and what those families call most of what I make. She's right. I know she's right. I knew she was right before she said it. She stopped walking. What I didn't know is that she said it to me like she expected me to do something, not like she was educating me or performing her own position, like she actually thought I was the person who could change it. Are you? She looked at him. I could be. If I get through this vote. If Grant doesn't take the company apart. She paused. That's a lot of ifs. Most real things are. She started walking again. At the elevator, she pressed the button, and they waited. The hallway was mostly empty now. The reception had been winding down when they left. Can I ask you something? She said. You can ask. When did you decide this was worth it? The work, the community meetings, the fight to stay in rooms where people would rather you not be there. When did you decide it was worth the energy? He thought about it. I don't think I decided. I think I just kept showing up until showing up was who I was. He paused. My mother used to say, if you wait until you're certain, you'll wait forever. You just move forward and figure it out while you're moving. That sounds terrifying. It is. It's also the only thing that works. The elevator opened. They stepped in. He pressed 17 without her asking. She noticed. You know my floor number. You said it earlier. You pay attention. I told you, I pay attention to buildings I work in. She turned to look at him directly. The elevator moved upward. Andre, I'm not a building. No. He looked back at her. You're considerably more complicated. The doors opened on 17. She stepped out, then stopped and turned. Come up for a minute. I need to show you the documentation on the Bronzeville variance. I got new files this afternoon, and I want your read on the operational side before tomorrow's sessions. He knew it was about the files. He also knew it was not only about the files. He stepped out of the elevator. The documentation was real. She spread it across the suite's work table, contractor invoices, change orders, payment receipts, and a timeline that mapped the Bronzeville renovation against the financial records she'd spent 3 weeks quietly pulling together. Andre looked at it for a long time without speaking. He picked up one sheet, put it down, picked up another. These invoices, he said. 3 of these contractors, I know these companies. We've used them on other properties. And 2 of them are legitimate. Small, reliable, been with us for years. He set the paper down. This one. He tapped a third invoice. I've never heard of them, and I know most of the contractors in our network. Celeste came to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the presence of her without contact. The company was registered in Delaware 14 months ago, she said. Single member LLC. The member's name isn't Grant, but the registered agent is a law firm that also handles 3 of Grant's personal real estate transactions. Andre looked up. That's not variance, that's fraud. It's the beginning of a fraud case, maybe. She straightened. I need more. The money from the shell company went somewhere into the renovation account on paper, but the actual work wasn't completed, which means either the money was skimmed before it reached the project, or it was cycled through the project budget and extracted at another point. The buildings deteriorate. She looked at him. Grant's plan isn't to sell the properties as they are, Andre said slowly, working it out as he spoke. A functional affordable housing complex, even one he wants to convert to luxury, takes time and legal process to displace tenants. But a condemned building. He looked at the files. If the buildings deteriorate enough to be condemned, the tenants have to leave. Relocation assistance is minimal, and a condemned property sells cheap to developers who specialize in exactly this kind of acquisition. Celeste was very still. He's not waiting for the shareholder vote to give him the properties, she said. He's been setting up the conditions to make them worthless on purpose, and billing the company for the damage while he does it. The room was quiet. Then she said with a controlled fury that was quieter and more frightening than any raised voice would have been, those are people's homes. Yes. He's letting them fall apart deliberately. He's letting families live in deteriorating conditions. Yes. So he can profit. Yes. Andre looked at her. And he's been doing it while sitting in board meetings talking about responsible development and fiduciary duty. She turned away from the table. She walked to the window. She stood there with her back to him, and he could see in the set of her shoulders, in the controlled stillness of her hands at her sides, the specific architecture of a person containing something that wants to break out. He had seen this in her exactly once before, standing in front of Grant's shattered glass wall. Celeste. I'm fine. You threw a picture frame through a wall the first time you suspected this. I'm fine, she said again. But her voice had something in it that hadn't been there a moment ago. A fracture line. He walked to stand behind her. Not touching, just present. We have enough to bring to an attorney, he said. Not to prosecute, not yet, but enough to justify a deeper audit. Enough to stall the vote if necessary, while the financial review happens. The vote is in 9 days. I know. 9 days isn't enough time for a full audit. No. But it might be enough time to introduce enough doubt that 3 swing vote shareholders decide to wait. She turned around. She was very close. They were both realizing it at the same moment. The width of the conference table was behind him, and she had turned from the window, and there was less space between them than there usually was in the controlled geography of their public appearances. She didn't step back. He didn't either. This started as 6 weeks, she said. Her voice was different now, quieter. Not the CEO voice, not the performance. The other one. The one he heard at 11:40 at night in empty offices. 6 weeks to get through a vote. That was the agreement. I know what the agreement was. It doesn't feel like 6 weeks anymore. No, he said. It doesn't. She looked at him, directly, completely, without the management, without the calculation. Why does it feel so real? She whispered. He looked back at her. He didn't deflect it. He didn't step back. He let the question exist in the space between them, and he answered it honestly. Because somewhere along the way, we stopped pretending. She reached up and touched his face, just her hand against his jaw, tentative, like something she'd been holding back for long enough that doing it finally felt less like a decision and more like a release. He covered her hand with his, and then he kissed her. Not the way it would have looked for a camera. Not strategic, not performed. Quiet and real, and carrying 3 weeks of things that neither of them had been ready to say. When it ended, they stood in the same space with the files spread on the table behind them and the city lights outside, and nothing settled, nothing resolved, nothing simple. She looked at him. I don't know how to do this, she said. Not apologetically, honestly. I don't know how to be this, with someone. You're doing it right now. I'm terrified. So am I. She looked at him for a long moment. He could see it in her face, all the places where the armor had come down, all the calculations that had gone quiet, all the things that lived underneath the composure and the precision and the 6-page briefing documents. He thought of Maya saying, I think he's been lonely for a while. He thought of Loretta saying, don't be careful with yours. He thought of Danielle at the beach, laughing at something outside the frame. I have to be honest with you, he said. Okay. I'm still Danielle was. He stopped, started again. She was my person, for 10 years. And I have spent 3 years being very careful not to replace her. Not to let anyone be put in that space out of grief or convenience or loneliness. I'm not trying to replace her. Not to let anyone be put in that space out of grief or convenience or loneliness. I'm not trying to replace. I know you're not. That's not what I'm saying. He searched for the right words. What I'm saying is that this has to be real. If this is going to be anything, it has to be its own thing. Not a rebound. Not a performance. Not a contract with a different name. I understand that. Do you? Because you're very good at architecture. Structures. Everything designed and placed correctly. And I need you to know that I am not a structure. Maya is not a structure. Whatever this is, it's going to be messy and imperfect, and there will be days when it's inconvenient, and it won't look good in any shareholder report. Andre. She stepped toward him. I ate a burned grilled cheese sandwich on a Saturday and watched a documentary about anglerfish with a 7-year-old who was supposed to be napping, and I didn't want to leave. She looked up at him. I didn't want to leave. I sat on your couch with your daughter asleep between us, and I thought I haven't wanted to stay somewhere this much since I was a child. She paused. I don't know how to be the right person for this, but I want to learn how. That's real. That's the realest thing I've told anyone in years. He looked at her for a long time. Okay, he said. Okay. Okay. He picked up the files from the table. Now let's figure out how to stop Grant before he destroys 473 families' homes. We can figure out the rest after. Something in her face shifted. Something lighter, and also more frightened the way a person looks when they've agreed to something that matters. Together, she said. Together. The trouble started on a Tuesday. 6 days before the shareholder vote, Andre was at his desk reviewing the maintenance logs he'd been quietly cross-referencing against the contractor invoices when his phone rang. Marcus. He answered. Turn on your computer. Local news, right now. He pulled up the page. The headline hit him like something physical. Harrington relationship, a calculated hoax, leaked messages reveal CEO paid exec to pose as boyfriend. Below, the headline screenshots. Private messages, his and Celeste's, from the early days of the arrangement. Text exchanges discussing public appearances. The first email with the boundary agreements. A message where Celeste had written, "The photograph was useful. We should capitalize on it while the public perception is favorable." Out of context. Strategically cropped. Completely recognizable as real. His phone started ringing on the other line. Unknown number. Then another. Then a text from Marcus' brother. "They're outside your building." He stood up from his desk and looked out through his office window toward the street below. There were 3 news vans. He called Celeste. She picked up on the first ring. She already knew. "Grant," she said, before he could say anything, before he could ask. It had to be someone with access to those messages. It was Grant. "I don't have proof yet, but it was Grant." Her voice was the steady one, the one she used when things were falling apart, and she was deciding how fast to act. "Andre, I need you to listen to me. Do not speak to anyone. Not the press, not any shareholders who call, not Celeste. They're outside my building." A beat of silence. "How many?" 3 vans, probably more by the time I walk out." "Don't walk out. Give me 20 minutes. My daughter gets out of school in 2 hours." The silence on her end lasted exactly 3 seconds. He counted. "I'll have someone at the school, a driver I trust. He'll bring Maya to Loretta's without going through your neighborhood. You're not involving your company resources in my daughter's safety. Andre, she's my child. I know she's your child, and right now there are cameras outside your building, and there will be cameras outside her school in 45 minutes when word gets further. I'm not asking your permission to keep her safe. I'm telling you what I'm doing." He gripped the phone. She wasn't wrong. That was the worst part. She was completely right, and he hated it with every part of himself that had been protecting Maya for 3 years without help from anyone. "The driver's name," he said. "Raymond Park. He's been with me for 6 years. He has a daughter Maya's age. I'll text you his license plate. Tell him if Maya is scared he should—" "I'll tell him." "And Celeste." "Andre, I know. I'll tell him everything." He hung up. He called Loretta. He explained as quickly and clearly as he could. Loretta said 5 words. "I'll have dinner ready." Then she hung up, and he sat at his desk with the news page still open on his screen and the messages his own words. Celeste's words. The private architecture of something they had built together spread across the internet for every stranger to interpret. He thought about the message that had landed hardest in the coverage. His own from the second week of the arrangement. "If Maya asks about you, I'll tell her the truth." They had taken that one out of context so completely that it looked like a threat. The full exchange where Celeste had said, "I won't ask you to teach your child to deceive people," had been cropped out entirely. He stared at the screen. Then he opened his desk drawer and took out the maintenance logs and the contractor invoices and the shell company documentation that he and Celeste had been assembling for 2 weeks. He photographed every page on his phone. He emailed copies to Calvin Moore. He made a second backup and sent it to an address he used for personal storage. If Grant wanted to blow this open, Andre was going to make sure everything came out. By evening, the story had metastasized. The online commentary was what he'd expected, and worse than he'd prepared for. Some of it was directed at Celeste, the cold CEO, using a relationship to rehabilitate her image. Some of it was directed at both of them. And some of it landed on Andre in the specific way that he had always known it might, in the particular vein of cruelty reserved for black men who appear in spaces where certain people feel they don't belong. Bet he got paid well to play boyfriend. Classic trade your dignity for a check. Another black man letting himself be used. He read 3 of them before Marcus called and told him to put the phone down. "Don't read it." "I've already read it." "Then stop reading it. Nothing on that screen tells you anything true about who you are." "I know who I am." "I know you know. I'm saying stop reading it anyway because you're human, and it still hurts and you don't have to prove that it doesn't." He put the phone face down on the table. Loretta was in the kitchen. Maya had eaten dinner and asked twice why there had been a man named Raymond picking her up instead of Mrs. Kowalski from the after-school program. And Andre had told her there was a mix-up with the schedule, which was the version of true he had available to him right now. Maya had accepted it with the look of a child who suspects there is more to the story but loves her father enough to wait. He sat across from Loretta at the kitchen table. "She's asleep," Loretta said. "I know. You should eat something." "I'm not hungry." "Andre." "Loretta." She put a plate in front of him anyway. He looked at it without seeing it. "This woman," Loretta said. "Here we go. I told you to be careful with Maya's heart. Maya is fine. Maya doesn't even know. Maya knows something is wrong. She has known something was wrong since Raymond picked her up. She didn't say anything because she was watching your face, and she decided you needed her not to." He went quiet. "She's 7 years old, and she was protecting you," Loretta said. "That child has been protecting you since Danielle died, and you need to understand that the best thing you can do for her is let someone in far enough that she doesn't have to." "Loretta, I'm not done." She put her hand on the table, not reaching for him, just present. "I liked you for Danielle the moment I met you. You know why?" He didn't say anything. "Because you were honest. You were the most honest young man I had ever seen with my daughter. You didn't perform. You just were." She looked at him. "Is this woman honest?" He thought about the suite at the hotel, the files on the table, the moment when she'd turned from the window and the armor had come down completely. "I don't know how to be this. With someone." "Yes," he said. "Does she love my granddaughter?" He thought about the grilled cheese, the Uno game, Maya falling asleep between them. "She's learning how." "That's all I needed to know." Loretta stood up. "Now eat your dinner and call her." She's dealing with it alone. Call her." She went to check on Maya. He sat with the food he still wasn't eating. Then he picked up the phone. She answered before the first ring had finished. "How's Maya?" "Fine, asleep. Loretta has her." He paused. "How are you?" A silence. He had not asked her that very many times. The question, "How are you in their world?" was usually perfunctory, the surface greeting before the actual conversation began. But he meant it now in the other way. "I'm going to fix this," she said. "Celeste, how are you?" Another silence. Longer. She stopped. He could hear her breathing. "I'm sitting on my kitchen floor. I don't know why the floor. I just ended up here." "The kitchen floor is a good place. I have an entire apartment." Sometimes the floor is the right altitude. A shaky exhale from her end, something that was almost a laugh. "I'm going public tomorrow," she said. "I'm going to confirm the arrangement, all of it. I'm going to tell the truth before Grant can control the narrative further. That'll cost you." "I know. With shareholders, with the board, with the press. I know, Andre. It might not be enough to save the vote. I know." Her voice was steady. Not performing steady, actually steady, the kind that comes after you've already made peace with the cost. "But I'm not going to let Grant turn what happened between us into something shameful. I'm not going to let them say you were used, because you weren't. And even if telling the truth burns the whole thing down." She stopped. "You deserved better than what I put you into. You and Maya both." He sat with that. "Celeste." "Andre, we're not done yet," he said. She was quiet. "Grant made a mistake. He moved too early. He's got 9 days of documentation on that shell company and the contractor fraud, and now that he's blown the lid off everything, he's given us a reason to present all of it without looking like we're attacking him without cause." He leaned forward. He thought he was ending this. He actually opened the door. A long pause. "You still have the files. Everything. Backed up in 3 places. Calvin Moore has a copy." Another silence. Then, "Andre." "Yeah. I'm really glad you're on my side." He almost said something. The thing he'd been not saying for weeks. He could feel it at the edge of the sentence waiting. He said instead, quietly and honestly, "Get off the kitchen floor. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, we go tell the truth." She was quiet for a moment. All of it. All of it. Even the part where it became real. He looked at Danielle's photograph on the windowsill. At the woman he had loved for 10 years who had laughed at something outside the frame, who would have he knew this as certainly as he knew anything. Told him in her voice, in her words. Stop carrying me as a reason not to live. Especially that part, he said. He heard her breathe. Good night, Andre. Good night, Celeste. He put the phone down. He looked at the photograph for a long time. Then he said very quietly to the woman in it, I'm still here. I'm just also still moving forward. The photograph didn't answer. But for the first time in 3 years, the silence felt less like absence and more like permission. He ate his dinner. Celeste's press statement went out at 7:15 in the morning. She had written it herself. Not the communications team, not a PR consultant, not the company attorney who had called at 11 the previous night, offering to help shape the language. Herself alone at her kitchen table, not the kitchen floor this time, with cold coffee, and the specific clarity that comes after a person has stopped trying to control the outcome and started trying to tell the truth. It was 4 paragraphs long, short enough to be read in full, direct enough to be impossible to misquote. The relationship between myself and Andre Bennett began as a professional arrangement designed to address a legitimate threat to this company's leadership and to the affordable housing communities we serve. That was its origin. I take full responsibility for initiating it, and for the decision to allow public perception to develop without correction. What I did not anticipate and cannot apologize for is that it became something real. Andre Bennett is the most principled person I have worked with in 20 years of this industry. He protected his daughter from publicity at every turn and refused every opportunity to benefit personally from our arrangement beyond the professional recognition he had already earned. He was not used. If anything, he was the one who insisted on honesty from the beginning. I am making this statement not because it is strategically useful, it is not, but because Andre Bennett and his daughter deserve the truth told on their behalf by the person responsible for the situation. The company has more urgent matters before it. I will be addressing those at the shareholder meeting in 6 days. Andre read it at 7:21 standing at his kitchen counter while Maya ate cereal. He read it 3 times. Then he put the phone face down on the counter and stood very still for a moment. Maya looked up from her cereal. Daddy, are you okay? I'm fine, baby. You're doing the thing where you breathe slow on purpose. I'm fine. Is it about Celeste? He turned to look at his daughter, who was 7 years old and sitting in her school uniform with a spoon halfway to her mouth and the expression of someone who has been paying careful attention for longer than anyone realized. Why would it be about Celeste? Because you've been doing the slow breathing since yesterday, and Celeste is the new thing. Maya put the spoon down. Daddy, I'm not a baby. He sat down across from her. Something happened that's complicated. There's going to be some stuff in the news about Celeste and about me, and some of it is going to sound bad. I need you to know that whatever you hear, the truth is that we were trying to help people. Maya thought about this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Is Celeste in trouble? She might be. Are you in trouble? A little. Can I help? He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. You already help, every single day. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her spoon. I'm going to write Celeste a letter, she said. Because when people are having a bad day, a letter helps. That's what you told me when I was sad about leaving my old school. He could not speak for a moment. That's a good idea, he managed. I know. She ate her cereal. Can I use the good paper, the kind with the lines? Yeah, baby, you can use the good paper. The call started at 8. Calvin Moore called first. The statement is either the bravest thing I've seen a CEO do in 20 years of corporate law, or the most professionally suicidal. Possibly both. Is it clean legally? Legally, it's fine. She's not admitting to anything fraudulent. The arrangement itself was documented, consensual, and above board. What she's admitted to is a public relations strategy which is embarrassing but not actionable. A pause. Andre, the shareholders are going to interpret this as weakness. Grant's people are already in motion. I've gotten calls from 2 board members this morning asking about emergency procedures for leadership transition. How many votes does he need? 51% of the outstanding shares. Right now, the count is close. Celeste has the foundation shares locked. Grant has the institutional block. The swing votes 5 shareholders representing about 12%. They're the whole game. And after this morning, 2 of the 5 are being cautious. The other 3 I don't know. Okay. Andre was already moving toward his home office. I need you to file a formal request for a financial audit of the Bronzeville renovation project before the shareholder meeting. Not after. Before. Frame it as a standard fiduciary compliance review. On what grounds? On the grounds that there are material discrepancies between contracted work and completed work that may represent a liability to the company. I'll send you everything we have in the next 30 minutes. A silence. Andre, if I file this before the meeting and Grant's people catch wind of it, they will catch wind of it. That's the point. He could claim it's a bad faith legal maneuver to delay the vote. He can claim whatever he wants. The documents are real. The shell company is real. The incomplete work is real. Let him try to explain it. Andre sat down at his desk. Can you file by noon? I can file by 10:30. Do it. He hung up and spent the next 25 minutes emailing everything: the invoices, the cross-referenced maintenance logs, the shell company registration, the payment records, the timeline showing gaps between contracted completion dates and actual site progress. Every piece of it that he and Celeste had quietly assembled over 3 weeks while performing a relationship for shareholders who were now questioning their integrity. The irony was not lost on him. A texted Celeste, Calvin is filing at 10:30. Audit request Bronzeville project. Everything we have. Her response came in under a minute. I just got off the phone with Naomi Brooks. She has tenant testimony from 3 buildings residents who documented deteriorating conditions and received no response to maintenance requests over 14 months. Dated records. She's willing to present at the shareholder meeting. He wrote back, get her there, and get Darnell too. He has 14 months of pressure valve documentation. The board will say tenant testimony is emotionally compelling but not financially dispositive. Then we give them the finances first and the testimony after. You don't win these rooms with one kind of truth. You win them with the kind that comes at you from every direction. A pause. You should have been a lawyer. I should have been a lot of things. Right now I'm an operations manager with a filing deadline. Call me at noon. Grant moved faster than either of them expected. By 10 o'clock, 2 hours before Calvin's filing, Andre's inbox had a message from the company's HR department flagged urgent. He opened it. His stomach tightened. A formal notice of investigation. His name. An allegation of financial impropriety, specifically that he had received undisclosed compensation in exchange for influencing tenant representative selections in the Southside communities. He read it twice. The allegation was specific enough to require documentation that didn't exist, which meant someone had manufactured it. Or someone had found a piece of legitimate paperwork and framed it so that it looked like something it wasn't. He had, in the normal course of his work, approved payments to community liaisons who facilitated tenant meetings. Those payments were in the budget above board reviewed by finance. But isolated from context, reframed with different language, they could be made to look like something else. Grant wasn't trying to fire him. Grant was trying to freeze him, make the allegation serious enough that Andre's credibility at the shareholder meeting was undermined before he could open his mouth. He called Celeste. I saw it, she said before he got the words out. It came through the HR system, which means someone with access to HR processes at the executive level. Can you tell who filed it? The submission is flagged as coming from the board's governance committee, which Grant chairs. Of course he does. Andre, I want to be honest with you about what this means. The investigation doesn't have to be real to cause damage. If you walk into that boardroom under an active internal investigation, it gives any board member who wants to dismiss your testimony a procedural reason to do it without looking like they're just dismissing you. I know. It also, she stopped. It also puts you personally at risk. If they push this forward after the vote regardless of the outcome, your professional reputation. Celeste. Andre, I need you to hear this. What he's doing now is not just about the company. He's coming for your career, for your livelihood, for the thing that lets you take care of Maya. I know what he's doing. And I'm still in, yes. He kept his voice level. Because if I walk away, he wins everything. The company, the buildings, the families, and the version of this story where the black man who raised a stink got paid off and went quietly. He paused. That's not the story I'm willing to leave on the table. The silence on her end was the kind that meant she understood, and was also frightened, and was also underneath both of those things moved. What do you need? She said. The original budget approvals for the community liaison payments. Going back 18 months. Finance has them. I need them pulled and certified by noon. Done. And I need the board to know about the audit filing before Grant can frame it as a surprise attack. Can you call the swing vote shareholders personally before 10:30? I can call 3 of them. The other 2 I'll need help reaching. Naomi Brooks knows one of them. Carl Hutchinson. He funded her Englewood project 2 years ago. You know Carl Hutchinson. I know everyone who's been in a community meeting on the South Side for the past 6 years. That's not a network, Celeste, that's just showing up. She was quiet for a moment. I'll call Naomi. And Celeste? I know, Andre. Something in her voice went quieter. I'm sorry. For the investigation. For putting you in a position where this was possible. You didn't file the investigation. I built the situation that made you a target. And you told the truth about it this morning before I asked you to. He let that sit. We're past apologies. We're in the part where we fix it. Right. He could hear her pulling herself back into focus. Right. Okay. I'll call the shareholders. You talk to Calvin. We regroup at noon. Noon. And Andre. Yeah. Maya's letter arrived at my office email. She scanned it and sent it from your computer apparently. He closed his eyes. What did it say? She wrote. He heard something shift in Celeste's voice. Just barely. She wrote, Dear Celeste, my dad says sometimes things look bad, but they're actually okay. I think you are probably okay. Also, you are good at Uno for someone who said they don't play much. Your friend Maya Bennett. P.S. The anglerfish is my favorite too, because it makes its own light in the dark. He sat at his desk in the quiet of his home office, with his daughter's words in his ear, and felt something move through him that was too large and too specific to name. She's something else, he said. She really is. Celeste's voice was careful in the way that meant she was holding something together. She gets it from her father. He didn't answer that. He didn't need to. The 6 days before the shareholder meeting were the longest of his life since the week after Danielle died. Calvin's audit filing went in at 10:27. Grant's attorneys filed a motion to dismiss it as procedurally improper at 11:50. The motion was denied by noon because Calvin had anticipated exactly that objection and structured the filing to preempt it. That exchange, invisible to anyone not watching closely, told Andre everything he needed to know about how the next 6 days would move. Every step was going to be contested. Every piece of evidence was going to be challenged. And they were going to have to be right, not just convincing, because Grant had the institutional relationships and the embedded trust of a man who had been at this company for a long time and knew where every body was buried. The problem was that Grant had buried some of those bodies himself. Naomi Brooks came through on Carl Hutchinson. Andre did not know what she said to him because he wasn't on the call, and Naomi was not a person who gave reports on conversations she considered private. What he knew was that Hutchinson called Celeste directly at 2:15 and asked for a private briefing on the Bronzeville documentation before the meeting. That was one swing vote moving. The HR investigation was thornier. Grant's team had been more careful there. The allegation was thin but technically structured so that it couldn't be dismissed with a single document. Calvin spent 2 days building a response that didn't just disprove the allegation, but demonstrated with dated records that the community liaison payments had been reviewed and approved by the Finance Committee. In the same quarter, Grant was submitting fraudulent contractor invoices. The contrast was damning. The implication that Grant had filed the investigation against Andre specifically to neutralize an employee who was close to exposing him was the kind of thing you didn't have to say out loud if the timeline was laid clearly enough. Andre worked. He worked 14-hour days and then went home to eat dinner with Maya and make sure she felt the world was still normal. He helped her with homework. He watched half an episode of the Deep Sea documentary. He tucked her in and told her the same thing he told her every night. "You know I love you, right?" "Yep." "You know that whatever happens, everything's going to be okay?" "Yep." She reached up and patted his face with the particular authority of a child who has decided an adult needs reassurance. "You're doing good, Daddy. I can tell." "How can you tell?" "Because you made real dinner 3 nights in a row, and you only do that when you're trying to feel normal." He kissed her forehead. "Get some sleep, baby." "Okay. Is Celeste okay?" "She's working hard." "Tell her the anglerfish thing was true," Maya said. "Making your own light. Tell her I meant it." He stood in the doorway. "I'll tell her." He texted it at 11:15 that night after the day's last call with Calvin. "Maya says the anglerfish thing was true, that she meant it." The response came back in 2 minutes. "I know. It's the best thing anyone has said to me in years." Then after a pause, "How are you holding up? Real answer." He thought about what to say. "Some of the coverage has been rough. Some of it lands in places I don't like to admit it lands. I know, I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. It's not yours to be sorry for." "Andre." "What?" "I read what they wrote. Not all of it I couldn't, but some of it. And I need you to know that what they said about you being used, about your dignity, about why a man like you would be in these rooms." A pause in the typing long enough that he could feel the weight of what she was choosing. "I see who you are. I have seen who you are from the beginning, even when I was still pretending I was only paying attention for professional reasons. Everything they said is wrong, and everything they implied is the opposite of the truth. You are the reason this thing has any integrity at all." He sat with that for a long time. "Get some sleep," he finally wrote. "Big week." "Andre." "Yeah." "After this is over." "After this is over." He wrote back, "We'll have time for all of it." The morning of the shareholder meeting, Andre drove to the building alone. He had not coordinated with Celeste on arrival. He had not consulted the communications team about optics or timing, or what the walk-in would look like to the people watching. He drove his own car parked in the structure on the east side, the way he always had, and walked in through the main entrance in his good suit with his briefcase, and the backed-up documentation on a USB drive in his inside pocket, and the quiet, settled certainty of a man who has made his decision and stopped wondering whether it was the right one. There were cameras outside. He had expected that. He walked past them without stopping. One reporter called his name. He turned, looked directly at her, and said clearly, "I'll be in the boardroom. You can watch the outcome from here." Then he went inside. Celeste was already upstairs. He knew because her assistant texted him when he was in the elevator. The text also said, "Mr. Whitmore arrived 30 minutes ago with 3 attorneys. Ms. Harrington asked me to let you know the filing status. The audit has been formally accepted and will be presented as material to the board prior to the vote." He stepped off the elevator on 42. The floor looked different from the night this had started. The glass wall of Grant's office had been replaced, clean clear, as if the break had never happened. All the lights were on again, but this time because the building was fully staffed, not because someone was alone in it at midnight, making a decision that would change both their lives. He walked toward the boardroom. Naomi Brooks was in the hallway outside it, standing with Darnell and 2 other community members. He recognized a woman named Sandra Perkins, who had lived in the Bronzeville building for 11 years and kept meticulous records of every maintenance issue her unit had experienced, and an older man named Victor Clay, who had been the informal community liaison for the Halstead cluster for 8 years, and whose notebooks were the kind of primary source documentation that lawyers called beautiful. Naomi looked at him when he walked up. "You ready?" "Are you?" "Brother, I have been ready for this conversation for 4 years." She straightened her jacket. "You bring the numbers, I'll bring the people. Between the 2 of us, that board is going to understand exactly what it voted for." He nodded. He pushed open the boardroom door. The room was arranged for a formal meeting, a long table, 14 seats, a presentation screen at the far end. 9 board members were already seated. Grant was at the far end with his 3 attorneys arranged beside him, the picture of institutional authority. 2 of the swing vote shareholders sat mid-table, carefully neutral. Carl Hutchinson was at the near end. He looked at Andre when he walked in and gave him one small definitive nod. Celeste was standing at the front of the room. She was in a dark red blazer and black trousers, hair back, and she held herself the way she held herself in every room she had ever owned, completely still, as if stillness were a decision she was continuously making. She met Andre's eyes when he walked in, and something passed between them that was too fast and too dense to translate. But that meant, we're here, we're ready. Whatever happens after this, we did it right. He took his seat. Grant looked at him across the length of the table. This is irregular, Grant said to the room, not to Andre specifically. The presence of an employee under active HR investigation at a shareholder meeting is entirely appropriate, Calvin Moore said from the door, entering precisely on time. Per the company's governance bylaws, any employee with material information relevant to shareholder business may present at a formal meeting upon request of the CEO. Ms. Harrington has formally requested Mr. Bennett's presence. Calvin set his briefcase on the table. The HR investigation you're referencing, by the way, was filed in violation of the Governance Committee's own procedural charter, which requires a second member sign-off that your filing does not have. It's void. He sat down. Should I put that in writing now or after the meeting? 2 board members looked at each other. Grant's expression didn't change, but his jaw had gone tight in the way that Andre had learned over these weeks meant that something had not gone according to plan. Celeste moved to the front of the room. Let's begin, she said. She started with the foundation. What the company was, what it had built, what it had promised to the communities it served. Not as a speech, as a statement of record. Then she moved to Grant's proposal, the sale of the affordable housing portfolio. The timeline, the projected returns he had presented to the institutional shareholders who backed him. Then she said, before we vote on the proposal, there is material financial information this board has not seen. Grant stood up. This is not the agenda. It is now. She looked at the board chair, an older woman named Margaret Yee, who had been largely silent, but who had, Andre knew from Celeste, been on the right side of every close vote in the company's history. Margaret, the company has uncovered evidence of fraudulent contractor invoicing in the Bronzeville renovation project. The evidence implicates a shell company whose beneficial owner has ties to this board. I am presenting this information now because it is directly relevant to the shareholder vote, and withholding it would constitute a breach of my fiduciary duty. Margaret Yee looked at her for a long moment. Proceed, she said. Andre opened his briefcase. He laid it out, the way he had laid out everything in his career, methodically, in order, with each piece building on the last. The contractor invoices, the shell company registration, the payment records, the timeline mapping financial transactions against site progress reports showing work that was billed but never performed. He walked the board through it the way you walked a jury through evidence, not by telling them what to think, but by putting the pieces in sequence and letting the sequence speak. I was not a lawyer. He was not a performer. He was an operations manager who had spent 6 years learning exactly how buildings were supposed to work and exactly what it looked like when someone was deliberately making them fail. I knew this material, the way he knew the pressure valve documentation and the maintenance logs and the names of every superintendent in every building. Because he had shown up. He had paid attention. And the truth about buildings, the truth about most things, was that they revealed themselves to the people who were paying attention. When he finished, the room was quiet. Grant spoke. He questioned the documentation sourcing. He questioned Andre's standing to present. He suggested that the materials had been manufactured to influence the vote. Then Naomi walked in with Darnell and Sandra and Victor. And for 45 minutes, the board heard what happened to people when a company stopped taking care of the buildings they lived in. Not as statistics, not as line items, as human beings who had called the maintenance line 63 times in 14 months. who had lived with mold and broken heating and a pressure valve that flooded Mrs. Edmonds' bathroom twice in one winter, who had been told each time that the contractor was coming, that the work order was filed, that everything was being handled by a contractor that did not perform the work, because someone was keeping the money. Sandra Perkins put a 3-year diary of maintenance issues on the table in front of Margaret Yee. "Every entry dated," she said. "Every call I made logged. I have a copy for each of you." The room was silent. Grant tried once more. "These are anecdotes," he said. "This is emotional testimony that does not constitute—" "It constitutes evidence," Celeste said, "of a pattern consistent with deliberate neglect. And it is consistent with the financial documentation showing that renovation funds were diverted rather than spent." She looked at Grant directly. "You can characterize it however you like. The pattern speaks for itself." Margaret Yee put Sandra's diary down. She looked at the board. "I'd like to call for a recess before the vote," she said. 30 minutes. Grant's attorneys began moving papers. Andre sat back in his chair. Naomi leaned over from the seat beside him. "How you feeling?" "Tired," he said honestly. "Good tired or bad tired?" He thought about it. "The kind you feel when you've done something that needed doing." She nodded. "That's the good kind." Across the room he caught Celeste's eye. She didn't smile. She didn't need to. She just looked at him with the expression he had first seen 6 weeks ago in an empty office at midnight, the one he had not been able to name then and could name now. It was the look of someone who was not alone. He looked back at her the same way. The recess began. Outside the boardroom, windows 42 floors below the south side stretched east toward the lake. The streets where he'd grown up. The blocks where his mother had told him that local politics was the only politics that touched your real life. He thought she had been right. I thought she had also been wrong, or maybe just incomplete, because there was another category she hadn't mentioned, the kind of thing that touched your real life, not through politics or power, but through the simple, daily, irreducible act of one person choosing another. He sat with that thought until the recess ended, and then he went back in. The vote took 11 minutes, Andre counted. He did not mean to count, but he did the way a person counts the seconds between lightning and thunder. Not because the number tells you anything useful, but because the counting gives your hands something to do while the rest of you waits. 11 minutes of low voices and the sound of papers moving, and Margaret Yee writing something on the legal pad in front of her that no one else could see. 11 minutes of Grant Whitmore sitting at the far end of the table with his attorneys and his institutional confidence, and the beginning. Just the beginning of something behind his eyes that looked like a man who was realizing he had miscalculated. Then Margaret Yee set her pen down. "The board has reviewed the motion to approve the portfolio sale and leadership transition as proposed by Mr. Whitmore." She looked at the room without hurry. "The motion fails. 8 votes against 4 in favor. Additionally, given the material evidence presented today regarding the Bronzeville renovation project, the board is referring the financial documentation to outside counsel and to the appropriate federal authorities for review." She looked at Grant directly. "Mr. Whitmore, the board is also voting to suspend your seat pending the outcome of that review, effective immediately." Grant stood up. This is a manufactured attack. This evidence was assembled by people with a direct interest in Grant." Margaret Yee's voice did not rise. It did not need to. "The diary on this table has 3 years of dated entries. The financial records go back 14 months. The shell company was registered before Mr. Bennett was ever involved in this situation." She closed her folder. "You may leave the documentation of your objections with the board secretary. This meeting is adjourned." The room moved. Attorneys gathered papers. Board members stood. Naomi put her hand briefly on Andre's shoulder and said nothing, which was exactly the right thing. Grant walked toward the door. He passed Andre's chair. He stopped. For a moment he looked down at Andre with the expression of a man assembling one last thing to say, the final performance of someone who had performed his entire life. Andre looked back at him. Not with anger. Not with satisfaction. With the calm of a person who has finished something and is already thinking about what comes next. Grant walked out. The door closed behind him. Andre exhaled. He had not realized until that moment how much of the past 6 weeks he had been carrying in his chest. Celeste was across the room talking to Margaret Yee and 2 of the swing vote shareholders. She was composed, measured, professional, the CEO version, the controlled version. But when Margaret Yee touched her arm briefly and said something Andre couldn't hear, Celeste closed her eyes for exactly 1 second. Just one. Then opened them and nodded and kept talking. He saw it. He didn't think anyone else did. Naomi was beside him again. What now? Now I go home and tell my daughter everything is okay. And after that? He watched Celeste across the room. After that, he said, I figure out the rest. Naomi followed his gaze. She looked at Celeste, then back at him, and she smiled the smile of a woman who has watched a lot of people try to talk themselves out of the obvious. You've been figuring it out for 6 weeks, Andre. You already know. He didn't argue with her, because she was right. He found Celeste on the rooftop. He had not planned to find her there. He had taken the elevator downstairs, called Maya at Loretta's. Daddy, are you okay? Everything's fine, baby. I knew it. And then stood in the lobby for a while, not quite ready to leave. Something in the building still held him. Some unfinished weight. I went back up. Not to 42. To the roof access, which he knew because he was the operations manager, and he knew every floor of every building he'd ever worked in. She was standing at the far edge of the rooftop terrace looking south. Not at the lake this time. At the south side. At the neighborhood grid, stretching out in the late afternoon light, the streets and rooftops and water towers, and the particular texture of a city that had been built by people who needed it to hold them. He walked up beside her. She didn't turn around. She had heard him coming. The vote, she said. I heard. Grant is gone. I heard that too. The federal referral is going to be a long process. Months. Maybe longer. The company is going to take hits in the press. The institutional shareholders who backed Grant are going to be unhappy. I know. The affordable housing portfolio stays intact. She paused. The families stay. Yeah, he said. They do. She turned to look at him. The late afternoon had turned the light flat and golden and honest. The kind of light that doesn't flatter, that just illuminates, that shows things as they actually are. She looked at him in it without any of the architecture. No performance, no calculation, no composure maintained as an act of will. Just her. The actual her. The woman who sat on her kitchen floor when things fell apart and threw picture frames through glass walls when she was furious and called Jasmine Carter on Thursday because she said she would. There's no contract left, she said. No arrangement, no 6-week timeline, no strategic objective that requires us to be in the same room. I know. So whatever happens now, whatever this is, it's just us choosing it. That's what I want, he said. That's the only version I was ever going to stay for. She looked at him. He took her hand. Not the way he'd taken it in public, the careful staged contact of 2 people performing for an audience. I took it the way you take someone's hand when there's no one watching and no reason except that you want to, and you've stopped pretending you don't. She looked down at their hands. I don't know how to do a family, she said quietly. I want to be honest about that. I grew up in a house where love was something people demonstrated through what they provided and withheld. I don't have the template. Nobody does, he said. They just have the people. Maya deserves someone who knows what they're doing. Maya deserves someone who shows up and keeps showing up even when they don't know what they're doing. That's the whole thing, Celeste. That's all it ever was. He looked at her. You already showed up. You've been showing up. I burned the grilled cheese. The second one was fine. Something broke open in her face. Not sadness, not fear. Something that had been held back for a very long time that was finally being allowed to exist. She laughed. A real one, short and startled and completely unplanned, the kind of laugh that comes out when you've been braced for something serious and something true lands sideways instead. He kept hold of her hand. Come have dinner with us tonight, he said. Not an event, not a performance, just dinner. Loretta will pretend she's not watching your every move, which means she'll be watching your every move. Maya will talk about anglerfish. I'll probably make something that gets slightly overcooked. And after dinner? After dinner, we figure it out. One day at a time. One dinner at a time. She looked at him for a long moment. The city spread out behind her in every direction, enormous and indifferent, and full of people whose lives were continuing regardless of what was decided on this rooftop. Okay, she said. Just that, okay. But she said it the way people say things when they mean them completely. Loretta knew before they walked in the door. Not because anyone had called her. Not because she had seen anything. She simply looked at the two of them standing in Andre's doorway. Celeste still in her dark red blazer. Andre still in his good suit. Both of them carrying the particular residue of a very long day that had ended somewhere they hadn't entirely expected, and she set down the dish towel she was holding and said, "About time." "Loretta," Andre started. "Don't. I'm not interested in the explanation. I'm interested in whether she's staying for dinner." Loretta looked at Celeste. "Are you staying for dinner? If that's all right." "I made enough for 6, so yes, it's all right." She picked the dish towel back up. "Maya is doing homework at the table. She'll want to hear about the meeting." "Is she old enough for—" "She's old enough to know that things went okay. The details can wait." Loretta looked at her with the specific level assessment she gave everyone who entered this kitchen, the one that had nothing to do with title or income or how you were received in other rooms. "You love my son-in-law." The word landed in the room. Celeste did not deflect it. She did not qualify it. "Yes," she said. Loretta nodded once. Final decisive, like a door closing on an argument that no longer needed to happen. "Then learn how I make the cornbread," she said, "because Andre has never gotten it right, and Maya needs someone in this house who can." Maya took the news about the meeting, the way she took most things, with a brief silence, a clarifying question, and then immediate practical concern. "So the bad people lost?" "Yes." "And the families get to stay in their homes?" "Yes." "And you're not in trouble anymore?" "Not anymore." She looked at Celeste across the dinner table. "And you're not in trouble anymore either?" "Not anymore," Celeste said. Maya seemed to calculate something. "Okay." She picked up her fork. "Then you should stay for movie night. We do movies on Fridays, and this is a Friday." Andre looked at her. "How do you know what day it is?" "You never know what day it is." "I know it's Friday because it's the day before the day I don't have school." She said this with the patience of someone explaining something obvious to someone who should know better. "Celeste, do you like adventure movies, or do you like the kind where people talk a lot about their feelings?" Celeste considered this seriously. "Both, depending on the day." "What kind of day is today?" Celeste looked at Andre. "A day where people talked a lot about their feelings," she said. "And then something good happened." Maya nodded sagely. "Then we'll watch the adventure one, because you already did the feelings part." Loretta made a sound from the kitchen that might have been a laugh. 1 year moved, the way years move when something real is being built inside them. Not quickly, not easily, but with the specific momentum of things that matter. The federal investigation into Grant Whitmore took 14 months and ended with a settlement and a referral to prosecutors that was still working its way through the system when the first renovated building in the South Side portfolio held its reopening. The company took the press hits Celeste had predicted. 3 institutional shareholders reduced their positions. 2 stayed. 1 new investor came in specifically because of the transparency, a foundation that had been watching corporate housing developers for years and had decided that a company willing to expose its own board member was the kind of company worth backing. Celeste rebuilt trust. The way you rebuild anything, one structural piece at a time. She created the Independent Housing Oversight Council and staffed it with residents and construction experts and community organizers, including Naomi Brooks, who accepted the position with the stipulation that she retained the right to be publicly critical of the company whenever it fell short. Celeste agreed immediately. The board thought this was risky. Celeste told them it was the only version of accountability that meant anything. Andre returned to the company with the authority he had negotiated, and then some. He became director of community operations. The promotion he'd earned before any of this started in the job he'd been doing for 2 years before anyone gave it a title. He reported to Celeste. He pushed back on her regularly. She pushed back on him. The board occasionally observed their working relationship with the expression of people watching a phenomenon they didn't entirely have language for. It was by any measure effective. The Halstead cluster renovation displaced 0 tenants. Andre had insisted on a phased approach that kept every family in residence throughout construction. It took 4 months longer than Grant's original timeline. It cost more. The buildings, when finished, had new heating systems, repaired plumbing, renovated common areas, and pressure valves that worked. Darnell sent Andre a text the day the system came online that said only "finally." Andre printed it out and put it on his desk. The night of the Bronzeville reopening. Celeste stood at the podium and looked at the crowd, residents, workers, contractors, who had done the actual labor, community members who had shown up to document and testify and refused to be displaced. And she said what was true. A year ago, I stood in an empty building at midnight and made a decision born out of fear. I was afraid of losing this company, afraid of losing these communities, and afraid of being seen as the person I actually am, rather than the one I'd spent years constructing. She paused. Everything that happened after that, the agreement, the scandal, the boardroom, all of it came down to one question that someone asked me that I wasn't prepared to answer. He asked why it all felt real. She looked at the crowd. The answer is that it was. It was real because the people in this room made it real. The families who stayed and documented and testified. The workers who showed up to do honest work. The community members who refused to accept that deterioration was inevitable. She stepped back from the podium. I'm not the story tonight. This building is. The people in it are. Thank you for letting us be part of it. She stepped away from the microphone. 3 rows back, Andre was standing with Maya, who was in her good dress and her good shoes, and had opinions about both. When Celeste stepped down and made her way through the crowd to where they stood, Maya reached up and took her hand without being asked. Just reached up and took it the way children do when they have decided that something is decided. Celeste looked down at her. Maya looked up at her. You did good, Maya said. We all did, Celeste said. Yeah, but you did good too. She swung their joined hands once, matter of fact. I'm glad you didn't mess it up. Andre put his hand briefly over his eyes. Maya. What, it's true. She could have messed it up and she didn't. That's not how you talk to... It's fine, Celeste said, and she was laughing, really laughing the way she laughed now, openly with her whole face, in a way she had not laughed in public in a very long time. She's right, I could have. I'm glad I didn't. Maya appeared satisfied with this. She looked around at the crowd. Can we get food? I saw a table with little sandwiches. Go ahead, Andre said. Stay where I can see you. She went. They watched her navigate the crowd with the cheerful authority of a child who has decided the world is mostly good and is moving through it accordingly. Andre turned to Celeste. She was already looking at him. Hey, he said. Hey. You okay? Yeah. She smiled. Not the CEO smile, not the performance. The actual one. The one that had taken him 2 weeks to see the first time, and that he now could not imagine not knowing. Yeah, I really am. He took her hand. The same way she'd taken Maya's, not strategically, not for any audience. Just because it was where his hand went now. They stood together in the renovated lobby of the Bronzeville building, while the celebration moved around them, and he thought about the night in an empty office when she had said 6 words that changed both their lives. He thought about a photograph that wasn't what it looked like, and then became exactly what it looked like. He thought about grilled cheese sandwiches and Uno games and kitchen floors and kitchen tables, and a 7-year-old who understood the world better than most adults he knew. I thought about what it meant to choose forward. The family contract lived on the refrigerator. Maya had made it on yellow construction paper in her careful, deliberate handwriting, decorated with what she described as professional drawings of an anglerfish, a dinosaur, and something that might have been a house, or might have been a cake. She had not specified, and no one had asked. Its rules were simple and non-negotiable. No lying. No leaving during hard conversations. One movie night every Friday. No business calls at the dinner table. Celeste had signed it the night Maya produced it with the same pen she used to sign board resolutions, which Maya considered appropriate gravity. Andre had signed it after her, and then Maya had signed it last big looping letters, her full name the way she signed things she meant. It had no legal standing. It was not notarized. No attorney had reviewed it. It was construction paper with marker drawings and the signatures of 3 people who had arrived at the same table from very different directions and had decided without contract or calculation to stay. 3 months after the Bronzeville reopening on a Saturday morning in Andre's kitchen, with winter light coming through the window, and the smell of coffee, and the specific comfortable noise of a family that has learned each other's rhythms. Andre set a small box on the table between them. Maya looked at it. Celeste looked at it. Maya looked at Andre. Is that what I think it is? Depends what you think it is. Daddy? Maya. Is it a ring? He pushed the box toward Celeste. He did not kneel. They were at the kitchen table in Saturday clothes with half-drunk coffee, and nobody's hair was particularly done, and that was, he had decided exactly right. I've been carrying this for a while, he said. Not because I was waiting for the right moment. There's no right moment. I was waiting until I was sure that I was asking for the right reason. Celeste looked at the box and then at him. And now you're sure. I'm asking you to be part of this family, he said. Not because the contract said so, and not because it's convenient, and not because I need to fix anything, or you need to prove anything. Because you show up. Because you burn the grilled cheese and go back and make another one, and you call people when you say you will, and you learned how to make Loretta's cornbread, and you sat with a 6-7-year-old and watched anglerfish documentaries, and you chose the truth when the lie would have been easier every single time. He paused. I'm asking you to be here, as yourself. Because who you actually are, not the CEO, not the performance, just you, is who I want. Celeste sat very still. Maya, who had been holding her breath, said, Celeste. Yeah. That was a really good speech. I know. You should probably say yes. Celeste looked at Maya, then at Andre, then at the box, then back at Andre, and she said yes with her whole face before the word even left her mouth. Yes, she said. Yes. Andre opened the box. He slid the ring onto her hand, simple, clean, exactly her. She looked at it the way people look at things that are going to change their lives when the change is finally good. Maya climbed out of her chair and wrapped her arms around both of them at once, which was logistically improbable and completely effective. I made a new rule for the contract, she announced into the general area of both their shoulders. What rule? Andre managed. Pancakes on Saturdays. She pulled back and looked at them both with great seriousness. Every Saturday, even if they get a little burned. Celeste laughed. Andre laughed. The kitchen was loud and warm and slightly impractical, and nothing in it was controlled or constructed or designed to project a particular image to anyone at all. They made pancakes. The first batch got a little burned. Nobody minded. Outside Chicago went on being enormous and complicated and full of people in buildings that needed to hold them. Families making coffee. Children doing homework. Superintendents, filing, maintenance requests. Community members showing up to meetings where they refused to accept that things could not be better. The city did not pause for the small true moment happening in the kitchen of a brick bungalow on the south side. It did not need to. The moment was enough on its own. Because it was not a performance, not a strategy, not a contract designed to convince strangers of something convenient. It was real, built through honesty and grief and stubbornness and burned grilled cheese and the kind of daily, unglamorous, irreversible love that does not ask to be photographed because it does not need to be believed by anyone except the people